Today is February 17th, 2023, and this week there were 164 reported cases of COVID-19 in Charlotte-Mecklenburg County, which shows a 23% decrease over the last 2 weeks. Therefore, everyone in the room is currently comfortable not to wear a mask. Okay. So, the purpose of the Living Archive Project is to gather, preserve, and share local histories, stories, documents, visual imagery, and memories about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on Black, Hispanic, Asian, Indigenous, and other minority communities in Mecklenburg County by means of audio and/or visual recorded interviews, documents, photography, and written work. The Knight School here at Queens is partnering with them to help conduct 6 interviews per group, which will fulfill the community service portion for our Capstone class. So, my name is Lily Fry. I'm currently a senior, graduating in May, majoring in communications with a minor in international studies.
Hi, my name is Kaya Shimapande Scarborough. I am a senior as well at Queens University of Charlotte, a major in communications, minor in sports management, and will be graduating in May.
Okay, we'll just have you introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Jo Mercado, but you all can call me Jo. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm an assistant director for leadership programming within student engagement here at Queens, and I'm also a Queens alum.
Okay. So our first question for you is actually going to be to describe your physical image. So if you were to describe yourself to someone who can't see you, how would you describe what you look like?
I am 5'2", a caramel shade of brown, and I have black hair with some highlights. My figure would be, like a apple shape. I have a gap in my teeth when I smile, which is pretty noticeable. Don't actually look, but and yeah, I'll go with that.
And then I'm just gonna kind of have you talk about what you wrote on your hand map, whether that is some of the adjectives you described yourself with, the experiences that you went through, who's been supporting you, anything like that. What kind of stuck out to you while you were doing that activity?
Well, first I'm going to say that as I was being prompted, I'm a little bit of a sensitive person, and some of these topics are a little bit in my heart and a little, tuggers for my emotions. But on my hand, the first word that I wrote down was daughter. I think throughout the pandemic and now, that has been something that has been at the forefront of my mind a lot lately, a lot more than before. And it relates back to a lot of the, it relates back to a lot of the other things that I've written down as well. So, family is written in big letters on the outside of my hand. They are...
It's okay, you can share whatever you want to share.
I was not expecting that. They have been big supporters of myself and my career and my life. But both during the pandemic and now, I have found myself being a lot more responsible for them. So that was a few of the things that I wrote inside my hand as well. So clearly it's very much on my mind still. But as I was reflecting, that was a few of the people that really stuck with me during the pandemic and afterwards. On the inside of my palm, I wrote worrisome, distant, and memories. A few things happened throughout the pandemic for me, where I was transitioning out of grad school into a career and having to choose my job was based on how far I was from my family, which is really important, as you guys have probably already noticed. And because of the pandemic, there were a lot of challenges to try to keep my mom healthy, because she has some sicknesses, so worrisome was that word. And then memories. I felt like during the pandemic I made a lot of memories with my family, which led to some other things inside the hand, and one of them was stronger family ties. So, that's one of my strongest values, and it's really important, still is, and that was a huge thing during the pandemic. Still is, because we're still in a pandemic, and even outside of it, but yeah. Anything else that I should talk about?
No, whatever, if there's anything else you want to mention, but we'll also ask more questions and might talk about it more. Yeah, I'll take that from you, thank you. To give us some reference of some of the things that you've already shared, like where's home for you right now, but how's that different from where you were born?
Okay. So I live here in Charlotte, and I have been living here now for 2 years, but I would say that my home is back in Durham, North Carolina, which is where my family is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you said that you've been here for about 2 years, right? Does that include working, school, all of the above?
I've been here in Charlotte for 2 years, officially working and living. But as I mentioned, I'm a Queens alum, so I was in Charlotte for 4+ years and then left and came back.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of go backwards a little bit. Can you kind of describe your experience during the last 2 years and more of the COVID pandemic?
So I actually got my job here at Queens in the middle of the pandemic to work as, a staff member. And it was really interesting because I was moving from Western North Carolina, which was in the middle of nowhere, kind of, and there wasn't a lot of social activity happening, plus it was the pandemic, but it's very much surrounded by mountains. So when I was living over there during the pandemic, everything was just quiet and serene, and I was really excited to move to Charlotte because city life, getting to go out and do a lot of things. But when I got here, things were still on pause. There was not curfews, but things were not as open as what was before the pandemic still, even though it had been a year since some things had been lifted, right? We were still wearing masks. And coming back to work at Queens at an educational institution, there were a lot of pandemic protocols, so safety guidelines taking place. And I remember that being an easy transition because, we were experiencing that at Western where I was before, but I was determined to live a social life here in Charlotte, and it was just really weird and uncomfortable because I was expecting one thing and then I got here and it was completely different. I am also very young, and I had just finished being in a relationship for a long period of time, so I was really eager to just meet people. And I would try to go out to do social things, but again, the pandemic really hindered that. So I wouldn't say that I was sad or depressed, but I was going through some weird emotional feelings coming in to Charlotte and living here. But since then, my 2 years, have been pretty good.
Yeah. What was your kind of daily routine like in the height of the pandemic?
Okay. So for most of the pandemic, I actually lived by myself in that western part of North Carolina. And I would say that, every day I woke up and would always FaceTime my family. That had already been something I was doing before, but in the pandemic, it became a little bit more prominent to talk to them just because I couldn't see them. I mean, distance is one thing, but keeping communication because of health concerns for my mom, that's always my thing in the morning. Always call her. I would go to work and I would have to be very careful because you weren't really allowed to be in a space with another person at work. you had to be in your own office unless you were out in public. And then I would try to work out to try to relieve some stress, but it always had to be outside, or I would have to ensure that I would like schedule an appointment to go to the gym, which was weird. And then I would go home and be by myself and then go to bed, I guess.
How do you think that routine and the time during COVID changed your relationships, whether that was romantic or friendships or with your family, both positively and negatively? I know you've kind of already touched on that some, but...
Yeah. I think I experienced a lot of relationship awakenings. Okay. So, you know, I was, as I mentioned prior to the pandemic starting, I had been in a relationship for almost 6 years. So, you know, at that moment, 5. And that ended, and it did not end in the best way, but I do think it was impacted significantly by the pandemic because so many restrictions and wanting to be careful because of, like, again, my family situation. There's a lot of limiting experiences with that. But I also found that I grew in other relationships. So my best friend was actually deployed for the Army during the pandemic. And we had already not been able to see each other often because we were just so far away from each other. But when someone is in another country for other reasons and also dealing with the pandemic there was a little bit more of a push to stay in communication with that person. And because we did have a little bit more free time to do that, I was trying to practice being a better friend. And also we just shared a lot of commonalities that I don't think I had noticed before in the pandemic. But family-wise, a lot of that pandemic time I did get to, in the beginning stages when everything got shut down, I spent a lot of time at home back in Durham with my family, which is where I think we developed a better family bond and really got to connect a lot more. Again, because of the health concerns, I think we all realized, like, you know, this is who we have. We couldn't really allow other people to come visit us or hang out with us, and also a lot of my family's family is actually in another country, so they couldn't even come anyway. So we were just very isolated, but I think that helped our family, again, really bond with each other. But then it became hard when I had to leave and come to my job and be more alone. So that is kind of where, you know, connecting back with my mom every day was impacted. But I feel like I lost some relationships, but gained a lot more bond and strength in others, which I was not expecting.
What's something that you think you learned from those experiences that you've now carried over into present day life, essentially?
Yeah. I've learned for sure that, you know, relationships, family and friends are very important. They've always been important to me, but that I also have to, like, work towards keeping them. And even though they're friends and family, like, there's still a lot of support that goes into that. And so I kind of mentioned to you all, my friend was deployed, right? Like, that's my best friend. And I learned that it's really important to, like, truly be there for someone in different ways and, like, really understand other people's situations so that you can support them in the best way. So I feel like I learned a lot about the type of person I was before and the type of person that I need to be, because I care about those people. And again, like, family and friends are a big value of mine.
Are you heading in? I am gonna change the conversation just a little bit and kind of ask about if there was a time that you stepped in to help someone that was affected by COVID-19 or any of the other events that were happening during the pandemic. I think that everyone, not only in the US, but around the world, kind of had many things that happened to them throughout the pandemic. And was there any time that you were doing something, whether it was through Queens or the job that you were previously at during the pandemic, or in your community in Durham, where you stepped in at all? If that makes any sense.
Oh, there's multiple, so I don't know if I can
share whatever you feel like is most important, something that is closer to your heart, whatever you want to share.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot that happened during the pandemic, right? The few things that come into my mind is so before being at Queens, I was in Western North Carolina, and I'm not going to say the cities and stuff, but I think people will get the idea. Anyway, there was a lot of racial tensions, as people like to call it, happening in the U.S. But really, it was just like people were dying. Specifically, our Black community was being really affected. And I remember at the time I was in graduate school, and being at this institution, something that I was really a part of or really passionate about was being of support to all minorities, right? Really to all students, but seeing everything that was happening online, on campus, amongst my friends and family, like, I wanted to do something. And before, I was not always very active when it came to social activism, like physically. And I remember being a part of multiple marches and vigils in the city that I was at in support of creating change, right? But also trying to go against these people that were saying horrible things about what was happening. But also trying to be like an advocate and a voice. And I remember specifically this one march where we were walking downtown, this area, and people were like scared to shout, like the chants. And I just remember thinking, like, I have to be loud, I have to keep saying things, and I have to push people around me, because if not, we're just walking, and it's not meant to be a silent walk, And I don't know if that was really helpful, but we did bring a lot of attention to the town, and we made sure that the people that weren't there were still represented, Yeah. That's one thing. The other thing that I remember, or the other thing that I did was more so here in Charlotte. With Queens, I got to work on something called Interfaith. Well, I can't remember. I'll have to come back to you about this. But basically, I was helping an organization with the chaplain here, the previous chaplain, and we were working with student leaders on campus who were essentially interns to work with educating minority or underrepresented and low-income communities around Charlotte to become better educated on COVID, and specifically the COVID vaccine. So we weren't necessarily pushing the vaccine or forcing that upon anyone. We were more so trying to get into communities that had a misperception or who just didn't really agree with this vaccine initiative, and trying to understand them and educate them on why it would be beneficial. And we were providing resources as to where you could get your vaccine, as well as actually did some vaccine clinics for communities, which was pretty effective. And honestly, not a lot of people were really interested in learning a lot because of cultural differences or just, different understandings. But we still were making some impact, especially with the Latino community, because there's a lot of language barriers and a lot of trust barriers. But that's one thing that was really exciting to get to be a part of. Very educational, and really eye-opening.
Were any of these experiences, both in the Western Carolina area and here in Charlotte, were those new to you? Like, were those things that you'd ever been involved in high school or college or anything like that?
So when I was when I was in grad school,
Mm-hmm.
that was the first time where I was physically being a social justice advocate.
Okay.
At that capacity, and there was just a lot of marching, a lot of protesting, a lot of verbal communication, and when I was, so that was more so new, but being an advocate for just social justice in general was not new, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I had attended a few programs where like people would talk about social justice, but I hadn't really gained the knowledge or the confidence to initiate or participate in certain activities.
Makes sense.
The vaccine education portion, that is definitely new. I have a healthcare background with my bachelor's degree, so I've always wanted to support communities, specifically like my community with that, but actually going out and educating a community about a global pandemic was definitely new.
Okay. Do you think that some of those new experiences have now carried over into this not really post, but kind of this after lockdown life that is kind of happening right now?
Yes. Okay. Yes. I feel like the pandemic created a spark in passions that I had that I didn't know how to initiate, or I didn't know how to initiate or just like do. And with the pandemic, when you realize that you could die, or that you just don't have an answer to something, like I really realized that we are the people that have these ideas, the knowledge, and that we can really go out and make a difference or something, something other than just, really what I felt like before the pandemic is that I was someone who took in a lot of information, right? Like I was a follower and not a leader, essentially. And through the pandemic, with everything that happened, now I feel like I'm driven to do certain things. Like I have to execute something, in order to live my values.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Do you think that you took up any other hobbies or interests other than those that you've already mentioned? Like some people took up knitting, some people took up singing, or like anything like that. Do you think there was anything more personal to you that you did every day that you ended up doing more?
Yes.
Okay.
K-pop. Okay, and I wrote this in my hand, in my palm, or not in it, but on the outside as K-pop. It says K-pop tickets on there. But prior to the pandemic, I had learned about K-pop, which is just like a genre of music that's specific to certain countries. And it, over the pandemic, blew up in my face in the sense that I was looking for like a thing, it became my hobby. And when I say it became my hobby, it's like there's multiple groups, and you can listen to groups, and you can like collect things, you can learn dances and like learn the language, and then you kind of do a deep dive. You might think like, really? Like that's a hobby? What do you do? But prior to the pandemic, I had already had that interest, and I had purchased tickets to a few concerts, and those were canceled, right? And originally they were like all postponed, and then they would happen again, and then most of them got just shut down, right? So it's like 3 years of holding on to tickets, and then all of a sudden it's like nothing. But I would say it became my hobby more so in the pandemic, because I was like, when we get out of the pandemic and these start happening again, I have to live life to the fullest and do all the things that I haven't gotten to do. And to me, that has been going to concerts. would you probably wonder, how do you do that with, the pandemic? Well, there are new rules to going out into public, right, or engaging in a tight place with so many people. So we practice a lot of mask wearing and a lot of testing and carrying around a COVID card or COVID vaccine card. But that's my thing.
I think that's something that has definitely, I remember seeing it even on social media, that it blew up more. And I watch YouTubers and see TikTokers they love that is their hobby. So I think it's interesting, because I love music, but I don't necessarily
it's very different, and I think it's because there's a lot of content that goes into it, which to some people it can be something that makes you feel better when you're feeling down. It's a part of like this escapism feeling. If you're a reader, like that's something that you tend to do. And it's also just interesting to learn about a different culture, because once you're interested in a group, you can like deep dive and learn more about the people, and then you realize that there's a lot of cultural differences, and it's interesting to just learn more and just be invested, and it's fun. So
you kind of mentioned it when you were talking about the difference in concerts now, but how do you think that even life from when people kind of consider the decline of the pandemic, like January 2021 to now, how do you think that like life has changed already since then, especially when it comes to not having as many mask mandates and there's not as many travel restrictions and testing requirements and stuff like that? What have you seen like and noticed as differences?
Yeah. Well, in my world, around my social circles and in the activities that I engage in, although there are not as many mask mandates or restrictions, I have found that the people around me and myself are still cognizant of them and implement our own practices in order to stay safe and healthy. So like if all of a sudden I start feeling sick, I still will go to work, but I'll still go to work, but I'll wear a mask. Or if I go out into public where I know that there could be a lot of strangers that, we could be very close, like I'll wear a mask. So social gathering is still a little bit of a cautionary experience, I've also noticed that like even when I am trying to travel and do like social things, I'm always considering the fact that someone could be sick, or when I come back from wherever I'm going, I could have some kind of cold, or just the transfer of like bugs, colds and all of that. It's a little bit more frequent. But I do also still experience like a lot of judgment when you do wear a mask. So that's still there. But I feel a little bit more like it's about me and others. So
that makes sense. I'm going to check the time just so I'm being aware of
4:43.
Okay. I'm probably gonna ask probably 2 more questions. So it's kind of a double-headed question, but how do you think this experience throughout the pandemic has like changed who you are as a person, and what do you think your kind of future looks like as we truly try and start and get into a true post-pandemic world? Because obviously I had to report the statistics it's still happening, it's still going to exist, but what do you think that your life looks like in the future?
I'm going to be very honest. I feel like the world is still trying to go back to normal, to what was pre-pandemic, and I can feel the effects of that's not reality. And as I'm becoming more aware of it, I feel like I'm not adapting very well. Good things have come from it personally, but I feel like I'm facing some challenges, and I think our society is still facing challenges because of it, whether those are social, whether those are health related, or just systemic related, you know. But I do think that the future, there's going to be a lot of major changes, because I think more people are starting to realize that we're not doing very well getting out of the pandemic, because we're still not there, right? Health is a huge thing in my life now, more so because I'm having to consider taking care of my family, because again, they have some health issues, and without wanting to really consider the pandemic, I really have to, because if I take my mom somewhere, we have to think about COVID. Anytime we go to a hospital or a clinic, like, we're gonna wear a mask. Anytime, you know, we're engaging, even with family, like, we have to do certain things. So I think my future is going to be very much having to think about health. Yeah.
That makes sense. So my last sort of question for you is, if you, 100 years from now, if our world was going through exactly what we've gone through the last couple of years, what would be a piece of advice that you would give to someone that's going to experience it? What would you have wanted to know before it all started?
To really live in the now, you know. Oh geez, man. Yeah, because there are a lot of things that I wish I had been able to do before. Because now life is getting harder, honestly, like financially, and ooh, wow, you're just making me think through a lot of things here. But yeah, my biggest piece of advice would be to live in the moment, live in the now. Yes, plan for the future, like plan for a pandemic, but I don't really know if that's possible. But knowing that, like, there could always be this idea of you not getting to do something, or like not taking an initiative to learn about something, or just not spending enough time with your family and friends. Like, time is precious. I know people say that after, like, you know, accidents happen, or like really bad traumatizing experiences take place, but it's like really true. You know, that would be my biggest thing.
I guess, is there anything else you want to share that was related to anything we talked about, something that you feel like you might want to say? If there's not, then it's totally fine.
Gosh, you know, I don't know, there's a lot, but I'm gonna stick to that.
Okay, that sounds good. I will stop this. Okay, she has one last thing she wants to say, so she's just gonna stick it in here.
Because this is really important to me, but I didn't know how much of it I should share, but I wrote down friend in big words, what I really wanted to write, and I wish I had, maybe I'll go back into it, but I would write down the name Norma. That was the name of my best friend who was deployed. And I know I mentioned that, you know, I had to really spruce up the way I was as a friend during the pandemic, and because they were deployed. But what also happened throughout the pandemic was this thing with Vanessa Guillen, who was an American soldier who was murdered. And it really impacted the Latinx, Latina community, as well as just women and other people who were really affected by like sexual assault and sexual harassment in their workplaces or even in the army. And that has stuck with me for a really long time. And during the pandemic, it was really hard to do like things to help that, but I remember that being a really big deal. And it's important for me to share that because I kept thinking about my friend, and I kept thinking about like all of these other female identifying soldiers, you know, who could potentially have experienced that or who did experience that. And you just think about how, like, there's already this crazy thing happening, the pandemic, and then yet there are all these other social issues happening. And these are just human issues, right? Like, all of these are all human issues, but, like, something like that happening to the people around me. I don't know. I feel like the biggest thing that happened was also just becoming more aware of the issues in our society, you know? But I just felt like I had to share that piece.
Oh yeah, I think it's important. I think that time where everyone was essentially in lockdown, you had the opportunity to truly look at yourself, but also look in the environment and the community and the world that you were living in.
Yeah.
Everything was much more under a microscope than it ever has been before.
Yes. I feel like I got to learn a lot more about how these things really do impact other people. Like, when you come into work, there are certain things that you can address or talk about or challenge. And, well, pre-pandemic you could do that, but I feel like now, because of everything that we did get to really deep dive or really unfortunately have to see be displayed, like, it just created this awakening of, like, okay, now I have to talk about it. Now I have to create some kind of impact and improve it or bring more awareness to it, you know? And now, like, I've seen some documentaries related to the Vanessa Guillen story, and I've gotten to read more about the family and just read about that whole situation, which is really important to continue to advocate for. But obviously there's no solution right now. I mean, there are solutions, but there's no.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.